Okay, so welcome everybody. This is Kira's Lollipops, lesson 5, a shining needle class. And today we're going to cover finishing up the base. And here we are. Here's the base. So first of all, I want to talk to you about a couple things. Someone had the genius idea of, since the base weights have a hole in them, where's my lollipops? Here they are. The lollipops will just slip right through them in your stand. Of course, now if they're sitting on a counter or something, that's not gonna be a problem, but when your grandkids pick them up, it is. So they had the great idea of taking the washer and putting it on a piece of cardboard and drawing around it and cutting that out, and then cutting the little piece of cardboard out and then gluing it onto the bottom of your base weight. And oh my goodness, that was a game changer. So I love that idea, and probably in the next version of the instructions, I will steal it and add it to my instructions. So I popped my base out and made one for it and popped it back in. So anyway, I love it. It's really great. So that's an idea you all can do if you want. I am going to post a page on the Shining Needle site that where I drew up a circle that it's 1.5 inches. Oh, it's a 1.5 inch circle. No, it's not. Never mind. Ignore me. That's for something else. Okay. But yeah, just take your washer, trace around it, and cut yourself out a circle. Okay. So on, there you go. Well, I'll get vertigo watching that. So we're on page 34 and 35 is starting the base. And I have you do another stitch in the ditch, which we already know how to do from our last week's lesson. And then off that stitch in the ditch, I have you put in the little mini fringe that goes all the way around. And if you'll notice, putting that mini fringe in around the stitch in the ditch, see if we can get it up here. Yeah, it makes that fringe kind of flare out instead of droopy down. And so when you set your base down, you don't have to flatten out all the fringe every time. It automatically stays flattened out. And so anyway, that's just kind of a fun advantage to a stitch in the ditch. You all can see how the mini fringe is all flared out instead of hanging down. Then the directions instruct you to go ahead and thread back down to any bee bead from base row 27. And base row 27 is the very last row of main color beads that you put in. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to do a couple of decrease stitches to hold this base in place so it doesn't so it won't pop out on you. I did it in 2 rows, and we'll discuss that if it's not tight enough for you. This morning I tried to do the demo using the actual piece, and I think when I rewatched it, it was hard to see how I added the beads, or what I really want to show you is how to do a skip a space. So I'm going to go ahead and do it on the bigger one so you can see the beads. Let me grab some beads. All right. So it instructs you to peyote 5 beads and then skip a bead. So just plain peyote, we're going to put a bead in.
What instruction are you starting with? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, they're not numbered. It's on page 36, and it says adding the bottom fringe and securing the weight.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we already, I kind of talked about adding this. It says peyote 1 mini fringe in between each main color bead that you did your stitch in the ditch with, and then you move your thread back down to this last row of main color beads that you put in. You get on the screen. Okay, So, and then it says peyote 5 beads, skip a bead. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to peyote 5 beads, which we're really not. We're only going to peyote a few, but they just go in the spots like that. And then it says skip a bead. Now, the reason why we're going to skip a bead is because we're going to try and make that area a little bit smaller. And then it will, and that's what's going to hold the base in place, because this is going to continue to, it will decrease and the beads will kind of sit on the inside circumference area. Okay, so, but when you skip a bead, all you do is just thread through the next bead without adding a bead. So I'm just going to thread through that, and that is me, and get my thread all tangled. There we go. That's skipping a bead. Okay, I didn't put a bead in this space. So on your bottom area, I skipped in it. Let me get my pointer. You'll do 5 main color beads, and then you'll just thread through the next bead, and it will create that little space you see right there. It's just hard to see because the beads are so small, but it'll create that little space. And then what you'll do as you go on, as you bead along, adding your next 5 beads, you can start to pull on that thread a little bit, and it will close up that area and make the circumference a little bit smaller. So that's all there is to skipping a bead. So we're going to just go along and, you know, you'll peyote in your next 5 beads, and then it says skip a bead. You just thread through the next bead. You don't add a bead, you just thread through. And then that creates that little space right there. Okay, so for then the next, you finish up that row. The next row, it says peyote 4 beads, and then put 2 beads in the skip area. So you're just going to pick up 2 beads on your needle. I got 2 beads on there. And when you get to that skip area, let me see, let me go through this bead. You'll pick up your 2, and they will just sit in that skip area right there, just like that. So you'll have 2 little beads sitting in there. And because 2 beads take up less space than 3 beads, you had 1, 2, 3 here holding a place setting, and these 2 beads are going to take up less space. As you continue to go around the 6 times, you're decreasing by 6 beads. Oh, 7 times, sorry, 7 times. You're decreasing that by 7 beads. And so it will pull in tight and hold your base weight. So if you get the second row in where you're putting the 2 beads in the skip area, and you feel like your base is not really secure in there, you can go ahead and peyote another round of beads, just putting 1 in every space. It's just when you get to those 2 beads that are sitting in the skip area, just thread through both of them just like they're 1 bead. Just treat them like 1 bead. And then when you put in your next row, that one will probably be enough to hold it secure. I have such tight tension that the 2 rows were plenty fine for me. But if you feel like you want to do that 3rd row, you've got enough beads, and yeah, you can do a 3rd row if you want. So really that is all there is to securing the base and the skip a bead. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that in the morning session, someone said, well, what is the difference between skipping a bead and threading through the next bead? There's no difference whatsoever. When I started writing directions, I started calling it skipping a bead. And I just want to be consistent in all my directions. 10 years ago, there weren't any standards for writing beading directions. So people kind of made up their own terminology. And that was a terminology I made up and started using. But because a lot of my patterns have that in there, I just continue using it. A lot of people will say, just thread through the next bead. That's the same thing as skipping a bead. Now, when you skip a bead and you just thread through the next one, as you go along and you pull tight, it's going to pull those two beads together and cause a decrease. There are times when you don't want to decrease, but you still want a space in there. And that's what I call create a space. And that's when you will, let's see, is it easier to see in the red or the white? Well, anyway, what you will do is you're beading along, is you will go down to the previous row's bead and go through it and then come back up to the next one. That's creating a space because you're putting all that thread in there instead of going across. If you pull tight, it's not going to decrease that little area. It's just going to leave that little space in there. And that'll leave kind of a little space to put a Swarovski or some kind of fun little fringe, or just leave a hole for just for fun. So, but those are my terminologies: create a space and skip a bead. And it's real easy. It's just just don't put a bead in there and thread through the next up bead. So that concludes our demo. And